I think we're ready. Hello, everyone, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is Isham Ghaffar speaking. I'm an undergraduate petroleum engineering student, and I'm also the secretary of the Society of Petroleum Engineers at SOAS University. Please let me welcome with us today on board Miss Marina Hatsopoulos. She is a founding CEO of Z Corporation, and Z Corporation in 2005, it reached $3 million in revenue. She's also the chairperson of the board of Levitronics Technologies. Hello, Miss Marina.
Hi there, welcome.
Hello, welcome. And for everyone, if you have any questions during the presentations, you can write them down in the chat section below. And if you have any questions else, you can keep them to the end of the presentations. We'll be happy to answer as many. Miss Marina, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm here to talk to you about technology entrepreneurship. It's really an honor to be with you, and I hope that during the presentation you will all ask lots of questions. So if you don't, then you can ask them at the end, but it's more interesting if this is more of a dialogue. So let's see. So I'm going to go through my personal story, and then I'm going to talk about US startup hubs today. And then I'll talk about the formation of a startup, and then a little bit about the startup ecosystem in Egypt, and then discuss entering the US market, and then some conclusions. So my personal story is I studied math and music at Brown University. These were my passions. I love them both. But I always had in the back of my mind the idea of being an entrepreneur, and my father was an entrepreneur. So I wanted to get a business background and see what that was like. I worked at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York in corporate finance for the oil and gas industry. And that was super fun. It was amazing. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot about finance. I learned how to assess a business from the top down. And I learned two very important skills, which I recommend for any entrepreneur, which is I learned basic accounting, and I learned sales, and I also learned how to negotiate. And these are all important skills, actually, no matter what you do. Then I went to work at Thermo Electron in mergers and acquisitions. And that was a rude awakening for me, because coming from the finance background, I thought I understood everything I needed to know about business. But if you are a business making an acquisition of a technology business, you're assessing not just the finances, but you're assessing the technology. And I realized that there was a gaping hole in my background. So I went to MIT and I got my master's in mechanical engineering, because my training at the bank had really given me a strong business background. So I didn't feel I needed an MBA, but I did feel I needed the technology background. And then at that point, I looked for a technology to commercialize. And I was led to the technology licensing office at MIT. So the technology licensing office takes technologies that are invented by the students and the professors, and then they look for individuals and companies to commercialize those technologies. So 3D printing was a technology that was invented at MIT. I co-founded the business with 3 other MIT folks. We co-founded the business in 1994. We were located in Kendall Square, Cambridge, just outside of Boston, which is one of the big startup hubs in this area. We were ranked the fastest growing business in New England in 2001. And over a period of 10 years, we grew to $30 million in revenues and had 125 employees. We became the market leader in 3D printing with #2 in market share, and a really leading technology. We were the only ones that could do parts in full color and could do them as fast as we could. I have 4 children, and so they were very little as we were growing the business, and I got burnt out. So after 10 years, we decided to sell the business. And since that time, I've been a corporate director on large public company boards, mid-sized businesses, small startups. I've been an angel investor. I'm an advisor. And more recently, I've gotten involved in the startup ecosystem in Greece. If you're familiar, I mean, it's just right around the corner from you. They went through a terrible economic crisis over 10 years, and they're only just getting into their recovery period now. And out of that period of very high unemployment, grew a startup ecosystem. And to me, it's very exciting because it really gives a different direction for Greece going forward. The amazing thing about entrepreneurship is the socioeconomic mobility it provides. So it's no longer about who do you know, who can get you a good job in the government. Instead, it's how hard are you willing to work? How clever are you about finding solutions to your problems and working through them? So it's, to me, a much more democratic way to allow people to be successful. I also write articles, personal essays, and short stories, and they're on my website, which is windystreet.com. And please feel free to, I don't know, I guess, unmute yourself if you have any questions. So this is a really important chart. This, what this chart shows, the gray line is companies that are 10 years old or more or older. And what you can see is in terms of the net jobs created, overall, old companies are generally not creating new jobs. Overall, as a group, over a long period of time, they're not really creating new jobs. Companies that are 5 to 9 years old is the red line, and that's hovering around 0. So also not really creating any net new jobs, which means that there are new companies entering into the 5 to 9 year range that are creating new jobs, but then there are other companies that are falling off and letting people go. And so overall, they're not really creating new jobs. The blue line up above is startups. So these are companies less than 5 years old. And what you can see is that over a long period of time, regardless of where the business cycle is, startups create jobs. On average in the United States, they create 1.5 million new jobs per year. So that's really for any kind of country looking to create jobs, you can see that job creation comes from startups. For me, looking at Greece and looking at Egypt, this is a great opportunity for economic growth. Looking at technology entrepreneurship specifically, one thing that is fueling it today are low barriers to entry. So you can build a startup today with extremely little amount of capital, which was untrue 25 years ago when you looked at the kinds of businesses that had big opportunity. Tech entrepreneurship offers opportunity and socioeconomic mobility. And there are new technologies that have huge breadth of impact across industries. So like the internet, it's not one application, but it can be impactful on all. And so a lot of times one new technology will then enable another new technology. And that can build entirely new markets that didn't exist before. So I'm going to talk about US startup hubs. Startups tend to cluster. When you have a cluster, that becomes very powerful because you have suppliers, you have your customers, you have other startups, other entrepreneurs that you can talk to get advice. And you have large enterprise companies who buy product from your startup. In terms of funding, there's venture capital and angel investments available. And you also have entrepreneurs who have sold their startups and they're creating new startups and they're investing in other startups. So this all becomes a very virtuous cycle that helps these clusters to grow stronger and stronger. The culture within these startup clusters is very unique. So for one thing, it's very okay to break the norm. Being a rule breaker is okay. It's also okay to fail. You are not going to be penalized for having a failed startup in your background. The important thing about failure is to learn from it. And that's something that's difficult, I've noticed, with Greek entrepreneurs. I don't know if that's true in Egypt as well, but that is something that as an entrepreneur you have to get over, because your every day is filled with both rejection and failure. And you just have to brush yourself off, learn from it, and move forward. The other thing that startup clusters have are universities and research centers. So this is where the core research and innovation is taking place. So that can be licensed, as we did at Z Corporation. It's also where there's student talent available. And there are often entrepreneurial programs that help startups to get off the ground. MIT has incredible programming for startups. And then finally, these startup clusters have incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, all the tools that a startup needs to get off the ground. And this is huge, because in our day, back in 1994, we didn't have that. And it's very difficult if you're being asked to sign a 5-year lease as a startup. The one thing you know for sure is that in 5 years, you're not going to need the space you have. Either it's going to be too small or it's going to be too big. And so being locked in is extremely difficult. We would have loved to have access to co-working space. Finding real estate was a huge issue for us. So if you look at the total venture capital investments in the United States last year, it was $137 billion. 78% of it was in the top 3 hubs in the US. The California, Silicon Valley, $63 billion, by far the largest. New York was number 2 at $27 billion. And Massachusetts is number 3 at $11 billion. And all the others pale in comparison. So these are the real centers in the United States. So Silicon Valley is the one we all know very well. It's got a very strong ecosystem. Stanford and other top universities are located there. There are thousands of tech startups and enterprises. They have the highest valuations. They also have the most funding available, both venture capital and angel investments, because they have the highest concentration of millionaires and billionaires. The industries they serve are across the board: software, social media, internet services, blockchain, fintech, and many others. US startup hubs, New York is the second one. This is a very concentrated ecosystem. If you've ever, I don't know if you can, if someone's trying to ask a question, is there a way, can they just unmute themselves? Okay, well, anyway, feel free if you have a question to just unmute yourself and speak up. So in New York, if you've ever been there, is physically extremely concentrated. It has 110 universities. Oh, where did I go? Okay, can you see? Can you see the screen? Okay. Is this good? Can you see it all? Oh. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Okay, so there are 110 universities and over 500,000 students located in New York. There are 9,000 startups with a value of $71 billion and over 100 incubators. The industries covered there are computer systems design, web services and apps, e-commerce, IT and software, gaming, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. The number 3 startup hub is in my own backyard, Boston. This includes 35 colleges, including MIT and Harvard, with 152,000 students. It has the highest concentration of millennials, so over 1/3 of the population is in their 20s, up to 34. There are 7 teaching hospitals and 2,000 startups, as well as almost 1,000 biotech companies. So there's a real focus on biotech here. There's $3 billion of venture capital, which is 7.5% of the global share. And it's filled with incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces. The areas of specialty are robotics, 3D printing, and biotech. So I'm going to talk about startup formation. So that's probably something you're all thinking about. How do we even start? So you first need an idea, and one place to get a good idea for starting a business is universities and research centers. Researchers need entrepreneurs and vice versa. The startups have to offer a solution to a problem. So you can't just go looking for some cool technology that doesn't really do anything. It has to be solving a problem. Opportunity tends to come when there's a disruption in the market. So this could be things like there's a new regulation in place or an old regulation has been removed. What you're looking for is a situation where a startup can get an edge over established businesses, something where there's been a change. And so you as a startup have an advantage. And as I said before, low barriers to entry really foster entrepreneurship and make it easier for a startup to get in. When you're trying to decide your business model, it's important to talk with prospective customers. You really should be doing this as a practice every day. So talk with 20 prospective customers. Are they in pain? How much would they pay for a solution? What are they doing today? How many units could you sell? What are the revenues you could make? What is the time and investment to get to revenues and to get to profitability? Find something you believe in. It's a very long road. One thing I look at kind of skeptically is when I see an entrepreneur who says, yeah, we're going to do this thing. We're going to flip it and sell it in a year for $1 billion to Google. To me, that says they're not really committed. You have to understand if you're getting into a startup that it's going to take a lot longer than you think. It's going to be a lot more work than you can imagine. And so it has to be something that you really feel good about. It's not just a question of doing a startup. It's actually a product that excites you. Intellectual property, I believe, is extremely important. So this includes patents. Patents are good for things that are very difficult to invent, but that would be very easy for someone to copy once they see it. Trade secrets. Trade secrets are good for things that are easy to invent, but difficult to copy. And then there's know-how. So these can be details like your processes, specifics of your ingredients, things like that. Anything that you can keep secret is good. And so you need to be very thoughtful about this, and you need to protect all your intellectual property, because at the end of the day, it's your intellectual property that allows you to have product differentiation and to price your product in a way that you can be very profitable. So it's important. Idea to startup. So as I say, speak with your customers every day, stay focused and ignore distractions. One thing you find doing a startup is that there are like a million different directions you can go in. And so one of the challenges is keeping yourself and keeping your team moving in one direction. It's incredibly important to disregard awards, press coverage, and other accolades. So it can be very easy in your early days. If you're doing something that's very cool that the press likes, it can be very easy to get swept up in that and to think you're the most amazing thing and start to drink your own Kool-Aid and really believe that you are the greatest thing. Your success is not measured by the articles or by your awards. Your success, your value is measured by the revenue that you're able to build, the growth that you're able to make. Is there a question? Can you say that again?
Sorry, it's a mistake.
Okay. Okay. The less you know about a business, the easier it is to appear. Okay. Can you hear me now? Oops. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Right. So it's easy if you don't know a business to think it's very easy. And it's when you actually get into it and try to sell product that you realize all the challenges of selling into that market. So your team is your most important asset. It's the most important factor for your success. So ideally, you want to work with people before you hire them whenever possible. People, for some reason, are very reluctant to do this. But for example, if you have someone who currently does not have a job and they're interested in working for you, see if you can bring them on a project basis to work for you for a few weeks before you hire them. And this will give you the information you need to see if you want to bring them on the team. Sometimes it's hard in an interview. An interview is not necessarily reflective of how someone will perform when they're actually in the job. Leverage your network. You all have networks already. And so make sure it's not just your friends, it's people you've worked with, it's your professors, it's your parents friends. It can be random people that you meet in the most unusual circumstances, but make sure you use that network. But also be careful and be thoughtful about it, because you don't want to hire somebody you can't fire. And this is something, I don't know if this happens in Egypt, but in Greece, you see a lot of family businesses. But look, let's be honest, you're not going to fire your grandmother, right? So you want to be careful about that. We all make mistakes. And sometimes somebody can be very valuable at the earliest stage of the business, and they just can't grow with the business. That's very, very natural. It happens all the time. And you want people to be successful. They want to be successful. If it's not a fit, you're not doing them a favor by keeping them on. So it's important to always be assessing people and making adjustments as necessary. You want to empower your people and capitalize on the stars, even if they have specific shortcomings. So our team, we had two of the most creative engineers imaginable. They were remarkable, so creative. But I couldn't get them to do things like show up at work first thing in the morning. I mean, they would show up when they would show up. One of them wouldn't wear shoes to meetings. It was just these weird quirks. But and you know, he didn't like to do sort of the administrative tasks of the job. But you know, both of these people were so valuable at the core of what they did, which was so important to our business, that we found ways to fill in the holes that they were missing. And it made our team incredibly strong as a result. If you have a salesperson on your founding team, you have a 3 times greater chance of success. So think about that as you're building your team. And be honest with yourself about what are the missing areas of expertise and fill in those holes. What you don't want to do is hire someone in your own image. That's a complete waste, because you already have yourself. What you need is somebody who's very different than you are. First thing you need to do is divide the equity. So when you form the business, you have to decide if you're the founder, are you the sole founder? Are there 4 of you? Do you divide it evenly? And this is something that a lot of times students coming out of university who have an idea, they just kind of start doing it before they ever address these questions. And It's difficult, but you have to do it, and you have to do it sooner rather than later because it can get very ugly later. I highly recommend stock options, which vest over a period of 4 to 5 years. And the reason you want them to vest over a period of time is that very often business is founded by several people, and a few of the people will drop off after a year, after 2 years, whatever. And it's not fair to whoever remains over a long period of time to have the ownership be split evenly among people who are no longer contributing anything to the business. The market that you're looking at should be big enough. So you want to try to sell product even before it exists. Just go and talk to customers, try to sell it. Your early prospects will help guide the development. And what you may find is some customers who will fund research and development. So they'll actually pay to fund the development that you want to do. Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. You have much more to gain by talking to people than you have risk of losing it. If your idea is so easy to copy that merely mentioning the idea will allow someone to do it, then you really don't have any intellectual property to speak of, and someone's going to copy it anyway. Some thoughts about competition. So people fear competition, but in fact, competition can be okay. When you're dealing with a very innovative product, competition can educate the market. So in the case of us with 3D printing in those early days, nobody knew what 3D printing was. So having competition allowed our competitors to spend money educating the market, and then we could go in and sell our product to those customers who were already selling. And also competition gave us a benchmark against which we could sell. So we could say, we're faster than they are. We have color and they don't have it. We're cheaper, whatever. But you want to be careful. You don't want competition from huge incumbents. So like you want to be pretty careful building a business to go and compete against Google or Microsoft, because companies like that have capital. They have basically effectively unlimited capital. They have talent, they have experience, they know the market, they have distribution, and they're not stupid. So one thing I see entrepreneurs do is they say, well, we're a lot smarter. You know, not necessarily. You might be, but you should be careful with that. It could be that Google has already tried to do it, and there's a reason why that's not a good market opportunity. Or it may be that they haven't thought of it, but as soon as you prove it out, they can just go and run with it. So you want to be careful with that. You want to think about who is perfectly positioned in terms of customers, in terms of technology. Why haven't they already done it together? What would keep them from entering the market? Do you have any intellectual property that can block them? And will they have the unfair advantage, or will you? In the case of Z Corporation with our 3D printing technology, this had been developed at MIT over 5 years before we acquired it. So we had the team that knew the most about this technology of anybody in the whole world. So we were perfectly positioned to pursue this opportunity. And then you need product differentiation. You need your product to be better than anything else. And so you have to think about what makes you, your team, your product uniquely positioned to exploit this market opportunity. One thing you'll need is money, obviously. So you always need to watch your cash, how many months left you have, and make sure you're deducting your last payroll, your last rent when you're calculating how many months you have left. Have a plan for reaching profitability, and you need milestones, invest-worthy milestones to reach before your cash runs out. So you need a milestone that if you reach that milestone, you are very confident you will have investors lined up. And one way to prove that out is to look for investors and say, if we reach this milestone, will you invest? And so you have them already geared up, educated, ready to go. So that way, when you get to that milestone, even if you're very low on cash, you're confident that you'll be okay. And it's important because the reason companies go out of business, there's only one reason, which is they run out of cash. And stay in touch with your investors all the time. Keep them in touch as to what's happening. You will inevitably hit a bump in the road. And so it's really important for them to understand what's happening. And if you have good investors, they will stick with you through thick and thin. Corporate culture is one of the most important things you do as a leader. You need to focus. You can't do everything. All that matters is the results. So you want to build a culture based on results, not based on face time or experience. Time to market is absolutely critical. So you want to create an urgency in the business, like that you're running against the clock, because there are people all over the world now competing. Business has changed so much. And so you're competing in a global economy. It's important that you be strong. You can't avoid conflict. There will be conflict on a daily basis, and that's okay. Get comfortable with that. Don't hide things, be straightforward. And one rule is the 80-20 rule, and this is really important. You can get to 80% of a solution with 20% of the effort. That last 20% is what takes 80% of the effort. And so you're much better off not being perfect, because speed is so, so important. This was something that was very difficult for me to learn and to appreciate. But perfection is your enemy. If you try to be perfect, you will lose the market because you will be too slow. And what you need is to get a product to market that's good enough to get feedback from the customers. If you wait until your product is quote unquote perfect, what you think is perfect, the reality is it's not perfect for your customers, and you will have wasted a tremendous amount of time perfecting something that was just off base. And so you're better off to get back on course earlier on. And then obviously you need to make milestones and deliver on your milestones. Some of the common mistakes I see with startups is that the entrepreneurs are out of touch with the market, particularly with tech startups. It's easier for engineers to stay in the lab and to make one more improvement to their technology. But it's really important to always be talking to the customer and have them see what you're working on and get their feedback. Another is that the market is too small. So an entrepreneur has seen a problem that hurt them personally, but the reality is that the market really is not big enough to warrant a large investment. Or the problem just isn't painful enough. So customers are doing it one way. Yeah, there may be a slightly better solution, but nobody really cares because it's good enough. The other is conflict avoidance. The other is thinking you're smarter than the established players who have been in the market for a very long time. You need to show some respect for what they know that you don't know, because they've been in the market. The other is striving for perfection instead of excellence. And then the final one is trying to do too many things. So start with a focus on a beachhead market before trying to please everyone. Just find some paying customers, find a small group of paying customers, and then you can grow from there. Breaking the norms is important. So it's not that you are such a rebel that you want to, break all the rules. It's just that the norms are not relevant. What you're trying to do is something really new and really innovative. And to do something different, the existing rules don't apply to you. So you need to learn what's out there. You need to know deeply and intimately what's out in the market today. But then you need to do better than that. So whatever the state of the art is, that's your starting point, but that's not your end point. You need to do something better than what's out there in the market. And that means you can't follow the playbook. You need to make your own decisions and don't just do things the way things have been done in the past, because that may not apply to something that's totally new. So I did a little research on the startup ecosystem in Egypt, which was really interesting. I learned that Egypt is the fastest growing and the second largest startup ecosystem in the Middle East. So that's amazing. These are companies in fintech, e-commerce, delivery, and transportation. So the fact that it's so fast growing means that there are, there's an infrastructure that's starting to build this sort of ecosystem that I talked about earlier, which helps support any sort of entrepreneurial activity. My understanding of your government is that it introduces bureaucracy, as many governments do. Certainly Greece is no stranger to that, but also provides a lot of support in the form of incubators and accelerators. So take advantage of everything that your government is offering you. There are low barriers to entry for apps. So these are a couple of the apps that I found that have started up out of Egypt. And there's already a startup ecosystem building of incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, startup competitions, crowdfunding, angel investors, and venture capital. So this is great. These are all the pillars that you need in order to get started. Egypt has its first unicorn, which is a company with a market value of over $1 billion. This is in banking technology. It's super impressive that a small country like Egypt would already have that. It takes years to build a self-perpetuating cycle, but having a unicorn is a great start. So what happens is somebody starts a business, they build the business, they sell the business, that's called their exit. And then this exit creates wealth, not just for the founder, but for the whole founding team, for their employees. And it also becomes an aspiration for others who know those people who have heard the story. And so that starts to build a culture. Exited entrepreneurs invest in others and start up new businesses again. So if you do start up a business in Egypt, that's a great place to start, but that's not where you end. Egypt is a small market and you want to think about going into larger markets, and a natural market for you to go into is the US market. So US startup culture is one of breaking the norms, just do it, take a risk, failure's okay, think out of the box, what has never been done before. And it's a very collaborative culture. Be open, get feedback, learn what others are doing. There are big differences though culturally from region to region. So the startup culture, the overall culture in New York is completely different than Texas, is completely different than Mississippi, is completely different than California. So when you're entering the US market, you want to think about culture as well as industry as to where your product can best go first. Then, as I say, these vary a lot. Think of each state as being sort of a separate country. I want to give you some positive thoughts about immigrant-founded startups in the US. So it turns out that over half of America's billion-dollar startups have an immigrant founder. So these are companies like Yahoo, Google, Intel, Uber, Tesla, Stripe, Warby Parker. A quarter of these came to the US as a student. And these companies generate 1,200 jobs per company. So these are wildly successful. They have a huge impact on the US economy. Of all new startups, 1/3 have been founded by an immigrant. There is immigrant founder venture capital available. So these are venture capital funds that invest only in immigrant founded startups. And 1/5 of scientists and engineers in the US are immigrants. So the US, despite our current administration, is generally very immigrant friendly, and immigrants do very well in the US. If you enter the US as a student, universities have many international students. There's university programming for student entrepreneurs. And the typical university startup like ours is technology that has been licensed from a university. You have postdocs and students who co-found the startup using university resources. The professor may stay on the board and work at the company 1 day per week. And there's a soft, lower risk transition from working in a university lab to building the actual startup. Early stage startups The best way to enter the US market is through incubators, accelerators, and startup competitions. Mass Challenge houses startups in Boston at no cost. There are other programs like Techstars. You can get access to space, mentorship, workshops, and networking. So these are a great way to dip your foot into the US market without a huge investment. So in conclusion, before you do a startup, you really need to think about your own personal motivation. Why do you want to do a startup? It could be issues of independence. You want to make money. You want to employ people. You want to be the boss. You want a team to work with. You want to have a community. Maybe you want to make the world better. I invested in a company where the founder's mother died of a brain tumor. And he was a brain surgeon, and he came up with a product that would help somebody like his mother. So you might just want to make the world a better place. And that's a great reason to do a startup. So think about what are your short-term goals, what are your long-term goals, and always be reviewing that and looking back on that and making sure that that's the direction you're heading. So that when you're faced with a big decision as to which direction to take your business, you go back to your fundamental motivation and to your goals to make sure that you're being very true to those and that you've articulated them. We had big moments of crisis, as you will if you do a startup. We thought we were going to be alone in the market, and then two large players announced competitive products very similar to ours before we had actually launched our product. After we were generating revenues for a few months, we had a month with absolutely no sales. That was frightening. The other thing we did is things were going great. We were on this hockey stick, just shooting for the moon. And then we built up our expenses. We tripled our engineering team. And then all of a sudden our sales dropped when the market crashed in 2000. Very, very scary times. But you know, when these things happen, failure is information. You need to use it and you need to move forward, and don't panic. It's okay. Everyone faces it. So my parting words are: take a risk. Do what needs to be done, not what you are comfortable doing, what you know how to do. Do what it is in your startup, whatever it is on a day-to-day basis that has to happen, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone. You need to hire people who complement your strengths. So you need to be honest about your own strengths and weaknesses. You need to get comfortable living in a very murky world. Everything is murky. But controlling your own destiny is incredibly enriching, and it makes you feel very powerful. And despite the hard times, you need to persevere. There's no life balance. This isn't a time for life balance. You'll have that later. And in the interim, you need to celebrate the milestones and have fun. If I have one regret about Z Corporation, is that we didn't stop enough to just appreciate what we had accomplished and just take a moment to celebrate it before continuing to climb up the mountain. So that's all I have. But I would love to take questions now if people want to and can unmute themselves. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Anyone have a question can write it in the chat.
Oh, come on. First of all, are any of you thinking about doing a startup? Has this even occurred to you? I would love to hear if you've had an idea and you're just debating whether to do it now, whether to do it later, what's the right timing. Maybe you're worried about where to find an idea, what resources you have, you know, who would fund it. No questions? Is anyone thinking about doing a startup? Can you write in the chat, any of you who are thinking about doing a startup? Nobody? Oh, come on. Okay. No other?
Well, I think the main point here in Egypt that everyone is afraid of the idea of being stolen if he started to do his own startup with some people. I think that's the main point. Also, you will um, you will find many barriers to find fundraiser. Yeah, what's the mean? Sorry, I don't speak English very good, but I'm trying to deliver the message. Um, to find the one who found you to do your startup.
Who found me to do the startup?
Yeah, I think it's very hard here to find that.
To find someone to take the technology to do the startup?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that I've learned is that a lot of times there's a technology being developed by engineers and they really do not have an interest in the business side. Our co-founders certainly did not have an interest on the business side. And then you have people like myself who really want to do a startup, but they don't have any ideas. And I think that the trick is to get these two very different kinds of people who have very different networks, who are operating in very different worlds, to communicate with each other and to find each other. And I was just talking with someone last night about this, how MIT tends to produce a lot of inventors and engineers, also a lot of entrepreneurs, to be fair. But we were talking about him because he also does work at Harvard, and he was saying how Harvard has a lot of people more like myself who want to start a business but didn't have an idea for what to do. And so we were talking about, you know, how do you get these two groups of people to speak with each other and to collaborate and build teams together? And that is a challenge. But being honest and understanding what your strengths and shortcomings are is critical, and that will allow you to find the missing piece that you need in order to do your startup. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Any other
Marina,
questions?
I have some question about if I have some money, what should I do? Take MBA or start my own business?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think that's very specific to the individual. It depends what your experience has been. If you, for example, are a scientist or an engineer and you don't know anything about business, you've had no business experience, then you might be better getting an MBA. If you've had business experience, you know some accounting, you know how to sell, you're comfortable selling, you know how to negotiate. So similar to my situation, I'm not sure that the MBA will bring you a lot. It'll bring you a network for sure of people that would be very useful. But those 2 years you could spend building a business. But it's important to be very thoughtful about what business you go into and find an area where you can have very strong product differentiation. So there's no one answer to that question. I'm sorry, it's not obvious, but it depends on your own personal background. And it also depends on your tolerance for risk. So if you come from a wealthy family and you know that you're not going to be left homeless on the street if it doesn't go well, then pursuing a startup might make more sense for you. If you have no family wealth at all and it's all on you, you may not. Now, if you're young, you may say, hey, I'm not married, I'm young, I can always work, whatever, doing anything, then you may take a risk and say, this is the time to do it. You've got nothing to lose. But let's say you do have a family, you're married, you have 2 children, and you're the sole provider. Then what we did was we had personally an amount of capital that we could invest in the business, and we capped it. So we said, this is an amount that if we lose it all entirely, we will be okay. And so it's not going to be the end of us. We're not going to be homeless. And that was really important for us to know, that we weren't gambling our entire lives on this. We were gambling a significant amount of money that I certainly wouldn't have wanted to give away, but it was, we had enough without that we were going to be okay. And so I would think more about that, like, what is your plan B? Most businesses fail. Most startups fail. And most entrepreneurs have a failure in their past, and that's fine. So you just have to be realistic about that. Like, it may take you a few startups until you get it right. And so you don't want to put yourself in a difficult situation. And it may be that you want to go in the workforce, earn some money for a while, build up a nest egg, and then you can do a startup later. You'll have more experience, you'll have more of a network, you will have identified a problem in the marketplace, and you'll be financially a little more comfortable. So that's one thing I see in Greece, is that startups are founded by slightly older people than here in the US. Here in the US, they tend to be younger.
Okay, thank you. Omneya Mahmoud has a question about what are the main departments I will need when I start my entrepreneur's idea.
So what are the main departments I will need? I assume you mean like expertise, like areas of expertise. Is that what you mean? Oh, or do you mean like, who do you need to hire?
I think that, yes.
Yeah, okay, so it depends what the business is, but generally, like in a technology business, I tend to focus on hardware businesses. So you would have an R&D team, which in our case, we had a hardware team, mechanical engineers, software engineers. Almost any business today will have software engineers. And we also had material scientists. And then we had a sales team. We had an accounting team. And we had our manufacturing group to actually manufacture the product. But you don't need all of this on day one. On day one, when you start, you want somebody who can interface with customers. So somebody on the sales side is extremely useful, as I mentioned earlier. You need someone to do your finance and accounting. In our business, I did that at the beginning, and then we hired somebody. And you obviously need your scientists and your developers to be developing the product. So, I mean, we co-founded it with 4 of us, and we hired our 5th employee probably 3 to 6 months in, something like that.
We have in Egypt a lot of startups, but many of them, after some time, not a long time, but short time, began to shut down. And yeah, like 2 or 3 startups succeed in 101.
Yeah, that's very typical.
Why more startups doesn't continue?
What happens is there are a lot of reasons why startups fail. In the end, it's because they run out of cash. So they may have a great solution, but they just don't have enough cash to invest in order to get the product to the market, in order to generate revenues, ongoing revenues. There could be a lot of different reasons why. They may have missed the market. They may be too early for the market. The market isn't ready, or they may have missed the market. There's already a better solution by the time they get their product to market, or their product isn't exactly what the market wants. They were off, or the price could be wrong. You know, it could be a lot of times the entrepreneur doesn't take into account how expensive it will be to produce the product. And if they can't sell it at a high enough margin, then they can't pay their expenses. So even if they're selling product, they're losing money with every product they sell. And if you're in that kind of a situation, you can never build you're always fundraising. And so you can never build a sustainable business. But the kind of numbers that you mentioned are entirely typical. Most startups fail. So you have to understand that walking in. So you want to make sure you have adequate capital to get through a rough patch. It says, there's a question, short time plan for a startup is a good thing or not? 5 years or less, for example. Yeah, you can't. I mean, honestly, you don't know what's going to happen after 5 years. So you can pretend you do, but you don't really. I don't think you should plan to exit in 5 years because you may not be able to exit in 5 years. So you should plan to invest yourself for about 10 years. But in terms of your business plan, 5 years is plenty. Realistically, everything is going to be totally different in 5 years. So the market will be different, technology will be different. Your product will have evolved. You may have 10 pivots between here and 5 years from now. And one of the things that marks a successful startup is their ability to pivot. So most startups, when you dig in deep as to why they have been successful, they have often had to pivot several times, depending on changing market conditions like COVID, or the market crash in 2000, or could be a million different reasons why they had to. How can I beat my fear of failure at the first step of beginning my project? That's a great question. I mean, you can't do a startup. I mean, startups are not for everyone. And so if you're looking for a guarantee, this is definitely not the industry for you. It's just like anything, like if you're going to let the fear, we're all fearful. We all have fear. The difference between someone who does something and doesn't do it isn't their difference in fear. It's how they react to that fear. And so you can either decide you want to do it and acknowledge your fear and move forward, or you can say, I just can't take it. Like, this is too much for me. And then you shouldn't do it. Like, there's no reason to put I mean, I talked to an entrepreneur who got stomach ulcers. He was under so much stress as his startup was running into some problems. So you don't want to get stomach ulcers. Find another job. Life is too short. So this isn't for everyone, for sure. What is the difference in the mindset of the owners of unique projects or startups? For example, online platforms, besides being far-sighted persons. I'm not sure if I understand the question. How to know if it's time to stop investing in a certain business or a startup if I am just losing money? Oh, okay. So this is one I can answer, and I faced it as an investor in a startup that was having trouble getting market traction. It was a great product, but we were not making money. And so we were investing more and more. And then you say, geez, we can't keep going on like this forever. If we can't get to profitability, we're just going to be pouring money into this thing and getting nowhere. And that is a gut-wrenching decision because you've already put so much into it and you've put your heart and soul into it. And it's a question of can you realistically build a plan to profitability? And what is realistic and what is not realistic is in the eye of the beholder. A lot of times the founder can't really see clearly. They see things very, everything is being positive and working out great. And so you need an objective sense of what is realistic. How can you get this company to be self-sustainable? And that's a judgment call and a very difficult one. I think we've run out of time. It's the end of the hour. I don't want to take too much of your time. If there's any one last question, happy to answer it. Oh my gosh, we just had a couple questions. Okay, wow. Okay, I'll see if I can answer these really quickly. So is it enough to start a project with 3 or 4 software developers only? Absolutely. Yes, you can start a project. Starting with the team is much better than starting alone. And absolutely, 3 or 4 software developers make a super team. In order to start up my own business, does that mean I have to take a risk? I may have a little experience and I only have 2 choices, either start or not. Yeah, you have, to start up your own business means taking a risk. Absolutely. If you don't have much experience, you may want to get experience first. And experience allows you to see either best practices. It can allow you to see bad practices so you can do things better. And it can give you a little nest egg, and it can allow you to find holes in the market where you can build a startup. I do not recommend doing a startup right out of school with absolutely no business experience, because I don't think you have a realistic sense of how business works. Again, how can I form such a creative way of thinking to start a new applicable idea in starting a business? The best way to find ideas is just to talk to a lot of people. Go to technical university and talk to engineers and scientists. They're full of ideas. They have 1,000 ideas that they can't pursue. And that's just a very rich source of ideas. So I hope I answered all your questions. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your engagement. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on Facebook or LinkedIn, or check out my writing at windystreet.com, www.windystreet.com. I'll put it here so that you can see it.
Okay, Marina, on behalf of our chapter, SB Sales, I would like to thank you for this wonderful session and your great efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.